Up until this point, the videos on my platforms that have done the most and gotten the most views and engagement are me talking about my upbringing being raised as a Jehovah Witness. My family was deep into this as a child. Both of my grandmothers, my mother, my father, one of my aunts, two more of my uncles, and many, many cousins all were raised and members of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. As a matter of fact, living in Brooklyn, the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses was in Brooklyn for a time. It was called Bethel, Brooklyn Bethel. And some of you have seen when you're crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, there's these factories downtown Brooklyn. And one of them says on the side of the factory, read God's word, the watchtower daily, or read the Bible daily, and stuff like that. Bethel in Brooklyn was the factories where the Jehovah's Witnesses printed all their publications, all their Bibles, their books, their Watchtower magazine, their Awake magazine, pamphlets, all that stuff that they come knocking on your doors with. It was printed in these factories in Brooklyn called Bethel. My sister, my oldest sister, worked at Bethel in high school. Right out of high school, she worked as a volunteer. She was a temporary worker at Bethel at the factories that printed the publications. My next oldest sister married a Bethelite. That's what they called the people, the men who served at Bethel and worked in those factories. Now, being a Bethelite was interesting because they provided you with room and board. The Jehovah's Witnesses had hotels downtown in Brooklyn Heights, which is a nice neighborhood. It's the same neighborhood that the Cosby Show was filmed in, where the Huxtables live. That's Brooklyn Heights, one of the nicest neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and is very expensive. So the Jehovah's Witnesses had some nice hotels downtown in Brooklyn Heights, and the Bethelites would live in those hotels. And they would get all, the housekeeping. They got 3 meals. They didn't have to pay rent or light bills or phone bills or anything like that. But they did not get paid. They got like just a little bit of money for like transportation and stuff like that. Back when I was a kid, it was like $125, maybe $200 a month. So they did not get paid a real salary, but their needs, their rooms and lodging and meals were taken care of. They got 3 meals a day. The Jehovah's Witnesses also had farms upstate New York. And so they produced their own food and they served all the Bethelites 3 meals a day and gave them some money for transportation. And then, they would receive donations. Some congregation members would donate cars, donate clothing. So the Bethelites were taken care of in that way, which is interesting because if you think about it, it's like Big Daddy is not paying you any money, but he's taking care of your housing, your room and board, and your food and your shelter. And that can remind people of certain situations throughout American history that, were not that favorable. But they chose to go there. To enter Bethel, you had to fill out an application and apply, and you had to be in good standing, and you had to get accepted into Bethel. Now, Bethel was pretty much all men. Only men got accepted to Bethel. If a man decided to date a woman and get married, then he would have to reapply once he got engaged and let them know, hey, I'm getting married. Is my wife allowed to come live in Bethel as well? And sometimes they would say yes, sometimes they would say no. When my sister married a Bethelite, they had to leave. They were not accepted to stay in Bethel. He had to go out into the world and get a real job. And that's what happened. So anyway, like Bethel was an interesting thing, and growing up in Brooklyn, the Bethelites were always treated, like they was royalty. You know what I'm saying? It was like, okay, they take a vow of poverty, they don't work, they don't make money for a living, and they're doing God's work. They're like doing volunteer God's work, even though they're living in a better neighborhood than we did, and they probably ate better than a lot of the people in my neighborhood did too as well because the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, had their own farms, and so they would feed them pretty good food. Because I've been to Bethel. We would go on a tour of Bethel. They would give you a tour, and it'd be a group of us, 20 or 30 of us, and they take you all around the factory, and this is where they print these books. And the guy on the machine would say, hi, hi. So we used to go through these tours, in Brooklyn, Bethel, in the factories. And the highlight of the day was having lunch there. So when we had lunch there, I remember the food being really, really good. You know what I'm saying? Through a child's eye, lunch at Bethel was really, really good. It was a highlight of the day. So fast forward, my sister and her husband, who was a Bethelite, he came from Maryland, but after they got married, they were not allowed to stay in Bethel. They had to leave and go make it in the real world. So he got a job in New York and they got an apartment in Harlem. And unfortunately, their marriage did not last. My sister does not attend any of the Jehovah Witness functions anymore. She pretty much has left the organization a long time ago. And her husband, who I don't know if he's still in the organization or not, but he was once kicked out because he cheated on her, and that's a whole thing. Actually had a baby by one of her friends. So, that really happened. You know what I'm saying? Not to be putting nobody business out there, but this is just the truth. So, as I come of age, people was always talking about, hey, you should grow up, you should want to be a Bethelite, you should want to be a Bethelite and all this stuff. And I never wanted to be a Bethelite. I wanted to be a rapper. I wanted to be an MC. You know what I'm saying? And I wrote rhymes and I put all my energies into that. When we left the city, like right after my senior year in high school, we left the city and we moved to Virginia. And my sisters ended up moving down here as well. But my brother, my oldest brother, was disfellowship when he was about 23 years old. So he spent like 30 years not being able to speak to my mom. And they're just now, with her in her 80s and him in his 60s, they're just now rekindling their relationship, which is good, okay? Which is very, very good. However, all the time that was missed, we cannot get it back. All the pain and the heartbreak that people have gone through, you cannot get it back. Now, I'm not here to just slam on this organization. The organization did some good things for me. One of the things is it helped me with three of my best skills, which is reading, writing, and speaking. Because when you were a child, you were enrolled in what was called the Theocratic Ministry School. And in the Theocratic Ministry School, it basically taught you to be a speaker. Of course, they wanted you to be a good speaker so you could talk to people about joining their organization and recruiting new members. But the same qualities that it takes to be a good speaker to recruit new members to your organization are the same qualities that it takes to be a good speaker in sales or in hip hop or even being a motivational speaker. And in the Theocratic Ministry School, they would assign you a talk. A talk was like a 5-minute presentation where you would get up in front of the church, in front of the congregation, and you would read and explain a Bible passage. In the Theocratic Ministry School, overseer would judge you and critique you right in front of the whole congregation on 33 different speaking points. Like he would assign you one speaking point each time, modulation, repetition for emphasis, introductions, conclusion, theme, gestures, poise, audience contact, use of outline, use of scriptures, different little speaking topics. And I was always one of the best at that. I got good grades and they gave me more assignments and took me around the city to give big talks in front of big audiences. And that helped me become a greater speaker. All right. Now, that gift of speaking, I took and I used it in my hip hop arsenal. You are now listening to the Street 16 podcast.